Hello, in this video we're going to learn how to factor the trinomial 2c squared minus 7c plus 5. This section, factoring these trinomials, is a little harder because we have a 2 right there. When there's a coefficient of 1 instead of a 2, the factoring becomes a lot easier. When there is just 1, you can say, oh, 2 factors of 5, that combined to 7. Add to 7. Well, in this case, it does not work, but this still does factor. So the first method I'm going to do is trial and error. To use trial and error to factor this, I'm going to think of FOIL. If you notice, I have FOIL here. First, outer, inner, and last. If you remember when we FOILed two binomials, the first always gave us the square term, the last would always give us the constant, and the outer and inner would always give us that middle term. So that's what I'm going to think of. So I said, okay, I'm trying to go backwards here. So here's my two binomials. The first, the only factors of 2c squared would be 2c and c. The next I'm going to do is the last, 5 and 1. So if I put a 1 and 5 or 5 and 1, I don't know which way it goes. That's why it's called trial and error. We see if we can get the middle term. The middle term is the outer and the inner. So if I look at this upside down rainbow, here's my outer and my inner, and I get a 1c if I multiply those together, I get a 10c if I multiply those together, and that does not make 7. That makes 11 if they're the same sign. It makes 9 if they're opposite signs. So I know that's not right. So I'm going to erase. That's why it's called trial and error. It's because you literally erase and try again. So what if I switch it and I put the 5 here and the 1 here, which is only 2 factors. Now if it's a larger number like 24, you got to try all the different possibilities. So then I do it the same thing again. Look at my upside down rainbow, my outer and my inner, and I get a 5c and a 2c, which does make a 7. It makes a negative 7 in particular if they're both negative. So then I always add my signs last. If it was a 3c inside there, then they would have to be opposite signs, and you'd have to figure out which sign is which, depending on the sign of the middle term. That would be the answer. If you don't like trial and error, there is another method. I call it backwards FOIL. To use backwards FOIL, what I like to do is think of an umbrella instead of a rainbow. There's my little sad umbrella. Okay, and what you do is take the 2 outer terms of my umbrella and multiply those together. So you get 2c squared times 5, which is 10c squared. And then what you do is look for 2 factors of 10c squared that add to your middle term. That's where the stem of your umbrella comes from. So I wrote it out, 2 factors of 10c squared that add to 7c. So let me write a 10c squared. What are 2 factors of 10c squared? Well, maybe 5 and 2. So the 2 factors of 10, that adds to 7. But I want 10c squared, so I'll make it 5c and 2c. And I need it negative, so I'm going to make both of these negative. Oops, that did not work. Okay, there they are. Then what I'm going to do with those 2 factors is I'm going to go back and rewrite my original, leave the first alone, but instead of my middle term, I'm going to write a negative 5c and a negative 2c. Now it doesn't matter which order you put these in. You could have wrote a negative 2c and a minus 5c. That would have worked just as well. In fact, I might even do that in a few minutes. Okay, so then what you do, and by the way, I leave my 5 alone. So notice I left my first alone, and I left my last alone. This was the outer plus the inner. I replaced it with the outer and the inner. Okay, finally, what we're going to do is factor by grouping. To factor by grouping, we look at the first 2 terms and we ask what's common. We look at the last 2 terms and we ask what's common. So in the first 2 terms, the only thing that's common is a c. So then I factor out a c in the first 2. So what do I get is a 2c minus 5. The next 2 terms, nothing is common, so I put a 1. When the first term, this term right here is negative, I have to put a negative. So I'm going to factor out a -1, and I get the same thing, 2c minus 5. So then I notice, oh, look at it, 2c minus 5 is common. It's called factoring by grouping. And notice how I get the same two equations as above, or same two factors, I should say, as above. Just since I said I would do it, it doesn't matter what order you would do these in. If I would have done the 2c first and the minus 5c, you'll notice you'll get the same thing, right? Factor by grouping, same thing. So now it's common, the first two is a 2c. What's left over is a c minus 1. The second two, there's more common now. There's a 5. But the first one's negative, so I always take out a -5 if the first one is negative. If the first one is positive, I do not take out a negative. So this would be a c minus 1 as well. Now you notice how c minus 1 is common, so I could take out a c minus 1 and a 2c minus 5. And these are the same two factors as above. It doesn't really matter what order they're in, so either one of these are the answers. Hope that helps.